Fantastic. I don't know which of those I'm most excited about. You should pay more attention to that for lunch, right? We could have had ham today. So guys, great to see you all. I can't imagine a better way to wrap up the year than by honoring you, Charlie, and Brenda. So what we're going to be doing in just a moment is something that we love to do at the end of each of the colloquium each term, and that is presenting and inducting our new senior research fellows here at the Ostrom workshop. So this year, yes, please. Brenda. So we're not going to, of course, be able to do justice to your amazing bios and backgrounds, but just in brief, as many of you are aware, but just in case you're not, for the newcomers, Charlie is a professor at the Department of Environmental Conservation at the School of Public Policy at Amherst, as we just heard. Sorry that you had to not have today off as well. We're putting you to work. His background is in the study of governance of natural resources and the study of social ecological systems, mostly in the context of forested landscapes, and the evaluation of the impacts of human behavior on these landscapes using geographic information systems and remote sensing. He also has a background in institutional analysis, collective action. We all know these. You might not know that he was a programmer at IBM for a while, and a pioneer in open source software movement. Very cool. And among other things, moonlighting as president of the International Association for the Study of the Commons, and our Ostrom Research Chair for the term. And if you weren't aware, that's the first time that this has been awarded in more than 20 years here at the workshop. So, Charlie, thank you so much for everything. No, it's okay. We'll do a fist bump. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, look at that. We got.
I'm smiling under here.
That's right.
Create it later.
You can Photoshop it.
Photoshop it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's really an honor. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for being here. And thank you also, Brenda, for being here. Another former doctoral student of Lynn, indeed. And Professor Bushouse is in the School of Public Policy. Her research program has two interesting foci. I won't be able to do it justice. The first is lasting interest in the realm of activity that's neither market nor state. She researches the politics of nonprofit organizations and the policy process, like we heard about so ably just a few weeks ago. And a second that you might not be as familiar with line of research is focusing on the most vulnerable in our society, kids. Her research asks the simple question, why do governments consistently underinvest in programs that benefit children? And among other things, I thought, it's really cool. Your book, Universal Preschool, Policy Change, Stability, and the Pew Charitable Trusts, which was awarded the Virginia Research Prize just a few years ago now, explains why the state invested more in that context and why more states can't follow suit, which is a really pioneering, wonderful work. Many NSF grants, other awards and accolades to which you can add this one. So congratulations, Brenda. Sorry, it's not framed. We'll get there. Congratulations. Oh, you're good. You can just slow-mo.
What did I click on? I don't know. He's a major spot.
There you go. Hey, congratulations.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for
Very
being
much
here.
appreciated.
Absolutely. Okay, Charlie, now we got to get to work.
All right.
But no, congratulations.
Thank you.
again.
It's a
excited for
huge honor to
Yeah.
that. It's a huge surprise. It's been a huge honor to be here. Yeah, I just, and I'm looking over with a nice surprise. I can't help but give a shout out to Julie England and Robin Humphrey, who are colleagues, workshoppers. They're just amazing. I'm going to talk about projects they were involved in here, but it's just so wonderful to see you guys. And little, where's Waldo in those pictures? See them. So I'm going to try to do this in 30 minutes. See if I can get through it. I've got a lot to go through. But when I was telling Scott in the beginning, when I first came here, I was struggling with, I have a lot to tell you about of my kind of track from leaving Ostrom through my career. And I was also wanting to present a paper. And so Scott said, well, maybe do a wrapper. I don't know if you remember that, but that's kind of what I've decided to do. So I'm going to come back to the paper. The agenda is, first I want to just talk about common space peer production, which may be a phrase you've heard, maybe it isn't, why it's important. This was a light bulb moment for me when I left the workshop in 1998, and I've been chasing this throughout my career. I want to talk a little bit about the Convergence program, the NSF program that's funded the project. It's got important connections to Ostrom, the workshop. Then the paper, I'll just talk about some of the key points, takeaways, I think, from the paper, and then I want to close with some discussion of some points I've been grappling with. So here we go. It's going to go fast. So commons-based peer production, the broader picture for me has been this concept has huge implications for the way humanity works, especially on problems that we have to get done fast. This book, I'm sorry, the screen, I can't totally see it. This book came out right after I left the workshop, 20 problems, 20 years to solve them. The first one was global warming in this book. We haven't done that, have we? But I've been thinking about this ever since around this. Now, so commons-based peer production, a scholar in Harvard, Yoke Benkler, he coined the phrase and said it's the most significant organizational innovation that's happened in internet-mediated social practice. Open source is the quintessential instance of it, from what Yoke was saying. The characteristics of commons-based peer production, and the point I'm trying to make here is it's broader than just software, okay, are three things. Problems are decentralized from solutions. So people discover the problem, somebody else has a solution to the problem. So think in software, a bug is identified by somebody else fixes the bug. There's diverse motivations. I've written a lot about this, but it's a real puzzle when we were first thinking about open source. People are paid, people volunteer, people participate because they want to learn. There's a bunch of reasons why people participate in these things. And then the third one is the one that kind of trips people up sometimes. Governance and management is separated from property and contract. The way I think about this is, you think about the iPhone or something like this. Apple governs this project, Apple manages this product, and also has the intellectual property rights of this project and just manages the entire thing. In open source, commons-based peer production, you have, it's open source software is the best way to explain this. You have a team that actually has right authority to the version control system. So in my earlier work, I referred to these as common property regimes on the internet. And they have rights to those. And so there's a subset of people that have rights to do that. But the governance and management of the project is done more by the community. So the governance and management is separated from the property and the production of the software. And that's the key. So I've referenced this now and then, the famous article Between the Market and the State. The reason I talk about this in my students all the time when I'm thinking about hope in the future. I get really, the whole reason I've been chasing this is because the self-governance is across sector, public, private, nonprofit. It also scales across levels of government that we think about, local, state, national, international. I gave a talk on another project called World Librarians earlier here. That's a case of commons-based peer production where I'm actually working with somebody I've met in Malawi. I've never met him in person, and we're like brothers. And we're working together. So it's an example of that collaboration that crosses nations. So this is why I've really been chasing this for 25 years now. One of the things, the hypothesis I've had, and I really want to test this somehow, I've been talking to a workshopper colleague, Juan Camilo Cardenas, about possibly doing an experiment around this. We haven't really chased that yet. But I have a hypothesis that open source will lead to solve problems quicker than closed source. And I've got 3 existence proofs of why that is. The first one is, and Julie's going to crack up, Robin was probably around when we were doing this. There was a guy named Joby Gerals who was here in my graduate school when the web was invented. And Joby and I, and probably Julie, maybe Robin, we were puzzling about how can we create an IFRI project website. And the way we did it was we would go to the early browsers, Netscape Navigator in this case. You would view the source because there were no books on HTML. And you would learn, DIY learn from somebody else's webpage, copy the code, implement your own, and create a new derivative. And that would create a new page. Now that graphic, the web grew exponentially across the world. And I've never heard anybody say this, but I believe it's the most successful distance learning program the world has ever seen to date. It was crazy the growth that happened during that period. And it was driven by not open source. It was open source, but not licensed. So that's existence proof one. This is a crazy, interesting story to me, at least. The existence, the web is about individuals learning through open source. When I was writing my book, that I'll show you, have a screenshot in a second. Somebody told me, oh, you should read this dissertation by a guy named Bruce Tull about the Springfield Armory in Springfield, which my understanding is in the days of George Washington, even they established the armory right down the river from where we are. And in Tull's dissertation and in this paper, they talk about how the Springfield Armory was like 1820s. It was the early days of the Industrial Revolution. And the Springfield Armory was inventing machines to standardize arm parts, bullets and things like that. And so in the very early days, in order to get and Angie, this connects to data or, kind of open standards. In the very early days, Springfield Armory distributed the designs of the machines to the contractors across the United States with an effort to get them to pick up the machines and standardize. And they did that with two stipulations. One, if the contractor improved the process or improved the machine, they were obligated to give those improvements back to the armory, and the armory was going to share them with the other contractors. So that was 1820s. This is open source hardware. It's really the first reference I've found historically around this. Well, I'm sure there's others. And in Tull's dissertation, I'll close this thread with this. He said that the US jumped ahead in production 30 years to England because of this innovation. So that's existence proof two. And this is where now people are collaborating in an open source way. Third one, I'll just briefly say, is a paper about the human genome. And this one basically is saying that intellectual property, the patenting and the protection of intellectual property and the not sharing actually has slowed research and development in that area by 20 or 30%. So those three existence proofs are why I have this hypothesis that if we're trying to solve problems like climate change, this is where I'm really puzzling. How do we apply this to climate? These are showing me that we can get to solutions faster through this openness, open sharing, open source. Now with that, so that's my takeaway one for the first part of the talk. We need to understand how to do this. And so that's framing the paper and the project that the project that our team is working on. This is part of the motivation for me to be on the team. I think others too, who I can't see if anybody of the team's on Zoom, but hi if you are, folks. Okay, part 2 out of 4. So part 2, I just had to tell the Ostrom workshop this story. So the paper is funded, and I should have that on the paper draft. I want to actually, if we keep it, the reference to NSF, I should have that, and I didn't. It's funded by the NSF Growing Convergence Program. And now when we went for this grant, and I'll show the team in a minute, and I started reading about what NSF Convergence is. This is, if you don't know of it, it's one of NSF's 10 big ideas. And it's about attacking grand challenges of today through interdisciplinary, deep convergence of disciplines, right? And when I was reading this, when I first learned about this program about 5 years ago now, I guess, I thought, boy, this sounds like the Ostrom workshop.
Yeah, that's right.
My background, when I got hired here, I worked on the International Forestry Resources and Institutions program with my 2 colleagues who were amazing. And that was we were social scientists, 4 psychologists, Bert, he was involved, big time. So right then, we were already doing convergence research, and that was, 25 years ago. While I was still in graduate school, Eduardo, I guess, is not here. He sent me an email this morning, but I wanted to give him a shout out because the way I met Eduardo was SciPac, which was a collaboration between Lynn Ostrom and Emilio Moran and others. And this again was where we were converging disciplines. And that went for 5 years, and that's a book that came out of that group's project. We probably all know this book, right? So my message here is, I know you've already changed the name once, but maybe you should change the name of the Ostrom Workshop in Convergence Research, because it's been here for 50 years. So way to go, Ostrom. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to the paper, and what I'm going to do is just give some highlights. It's online if some of you may have seen it. So this is the fantastic team I'm working with, and as I said in the paper, I'm just reporting, kind of like our Ostrom Memorial Lecture. I'm the courier. It's not my work, it's the hard work of the team you're seeing. And I won't go through the names just for time, but they're just a fantastic group of people, brilliant people. I lost my train of thought there. It's a convergence team. We have computer scientists, we have Seth Fry in communications, we have Brenda in public policy and nonprofit management. I'm coming in this eclectic, I don't even know what to call myself. And Curtis Atkinson, a postdoc who's an anthropologist, and so on. And we've got just a great convergence team. And the reason we got this grant was because for NSF's convergence program, open source is a grand challenge. You may or may not know this, but you use it every day. It's embedded in all of our internet infrastructure in zillions of ways. There's a stat, 80% of businesses use it in one study. Arguably, public sector is probably in the same camp. And yet 90% of these projects get abandoned. And so and then there's also security questions. So this is the most recent one that I've heard about. And it isn't an April Fool's joke, came out April 1st this month about this XZ utils, which is something that's used in a variety of software. I think Linux has it a lot. Julie's nodding a little bit. And there was a real scare that a criminal hacker joined an open source team and over some time ultimately tried to put something into this utility, and it almost got distributed to the world, and somebody found it before it did. So for all these reasons, this is why it's a grand challenge. And yet we need not just software engineers, we need social science, we need the merging of disciplines. So the question that we ask as a project, or one way to phrase it, is what factors lead open source software projects to ongoing sustainability? I measure that by abandonment or not. And then we're also trying to actually come up with practical advice for practitioners, for programmers. So the big part of the paper was about how we get to a common understanding. And for my entire career, I've always leveraged the IAD, the Institutional Analysis and Development Framework, for the work I do. And we've had more than 2 years of discussion with the other team members about how do we come up with a common understanding of what we're studying as a group. And so we're still working this through. This paper is in part we're going to have a retreat right next to the WOW here. And this paper is informing the group. So we're getting, it's hard work to get to a common understanding. And so for me, this is a modified IAD. I'm using language because we're trying to get to a common understanding of frameworks in computer science. So we're calling it the Social Technical Governance Framework. But my part of the paper was trying to figure out how do we converge. And so there's two different types of open source situations. One is what we call open source software operating in the wild. They're working on their own. And then the second are open source software that projects that are affiliated with an overarching nonprofit foundation. And so the paper is largely about that second. But as I was sitting up here all semester kind of working on this paper, I was puzzling about this framework, and I'm just showing this slide. So this is a book that I wrote in 2012 that's got IAD all in it. It's up in the library. And this was my attempt to study open source software earlier, and it's all IAD. You can see IAD throughout the whole book. And this was all about projects in the wild, working on their own. And projects working on their own have several action situations. One, they have to figure out what kind of copyright license they use. Another, and the main one, is the new release management. How do they manage new releases? And the third, I'm guessing, is sometimes discussions about, do we give this up? There may be more, but for time, let's do a time check.
Great job.
My book, I studied the website that had all these projects on it was called SourceForge. So I had about, as the graphic showed, 170,000, and this was back in 2009. Now the primary one you hear about now is GitHub, which is a software development platform online that's free for open source projects to use, and it has file management in it, and it has communication tools in it. And it's all open access, and that's an important point. What this slide is trying to get at is what our Convergence team brings to the table. And it's really important, I think, for where we're going. And I'll come back to it at the close. Our colleagues in the computer science and other areas, Curtis and a bunch of our team, have network analysis background. They know how to do networks. They also know how to scrape the web and get all this access data downloaded. And so what that's enabled our team to do together, driven by these great colleagues who have these skill sets, is we can do social network analysis of the communications between developers. That's the middle of the slide. We can do network analysis of what we call the technical networks, which are the developers and the files they touch. And then what Brendan and I and others that are working with us that have been trained in institutional analysis, we're studying the governance side. We've been bringing that part in. Seth Fry is also another person that brings that in. So there's great opportunities. I'll get back to this in a second. And my big puzzle was, and this is one of the dialogue points I'd like to have if we have time to talk, is my computer science colleague, Vladimir Filkov, was saying to me, okay, the outcomes in IAD, there are outcomes that happen in that area you call action situation. And so we were trying to square that, like, how do we deal with that? And so what I came to, and I think I have a typo, I remember I was going to fix something I didn't, but this is a famous diagram of the internal opening the hood of the action situation that many of us are familiar with. What I ended up coming to, and I think I'm asking for reactions to this, is I put the IAD in the action situation because you have flows, the longitudinal flows in the action situation that happens that are changing social, technical, and governance, but they're micro. They're not the main outcomes that you might be interested in. So I'll explain this a little bit more. Well, on this slide, no, I'll do it in the ESF slide. A new release for an open source project would be a macro outcome. All those little changes they're doing are micro outcomes. And so going back to the slide about the digital techniques we now have the opportunity to, kind of like a microscope, really zoom into the action situation and understand all these little micro things that are moving. And so that's what a lot of the papers were showing. Let's keep going. I know I'm throwing a lot at you. Now that was individual projects, but now when you get into a nonprofit organization, foundation that works with them, there are now over 100 of these. Apache, which is one we've studied a lot, is one of the big ones. There's Eclipse Foundation we're studying now. That's another big one. Linux Foundation. We've studied others, one called OSGO. There's a whole community of these that, and basically what these nonprofits do is they're trying to support open source projects towards sustainability. And so they put, in the case of Apache, they put rules as they incubate projects, based on experience of mentors and others, of trying to get them so they manage their projects in a way that has been learned from other projects. It helps sustain them. So incubation is an important action situation. There are other action situations which I won't really go in here. But so we've been focusing largely on this podling incubation action situation. So this is the same slide as before, but now you've got an open source foundation that's got governance, its own governance. It's a multi-tiered governance situation. And you've got all these projects that are affiliated with them going through this incubation program. I'm just pausing, I know I'm fire hosing right now. Okay, looks like it was good. So again, all those tools, these digital tools, what we call digital traces, we can use to study these things in big data ways. And that's what our Convergence team's been doing. So again, my big point here, ending the framework side of this talk, is, does this square with you folks, or do you any reactions I'd love to hear in the question and answer? Okay, so I'm on part 3 of 4 now, and I'm on time. So there's in this paper, and again, I'm conveying what my great colleagues have produced, not what I produced. I pulled out 5 of our papers. We have more, but five of them that are on this podling incubation action or situation. And I just want to explain kind of the big points from them, at least in my view. The first paper is describing the computer science folks and how they scrape the open access data off the web, and then how they actually build a database, a relational database to store all that content. This is big data. It's historical data. They've got data from the early 2000s, I think, all the way till now, for every project that's gone through incubation. It's a massive data set. So we've all heard about this now. I mean, people are doing this, but this is really an opportunity for social science, as Seth Fry and others have really argued. And that paper is explaining how they kind of technically did that. It's not easy work, but it's the foundation for what we can do afterwards. The second one, which I can't see the title, is the Stefan et al. Paper. And on this one, what Stefan's doing is he's looking at the technical attributes of projects, and he's opening the hood of the incubation action situation using longitudinal time series analysis of the right-hand graphic is code commits by the developers. And the red line is the graduated projects, the projects that end up staying with ASF as full projects associated with them. The blue line is the ones that retire, that don't stay. And the main thing here is there's clear longitudinal action situation footprints between the ones that remain with ASF and the ones that get retired and leave. The third paper that I'm describing is by Curtis Atkinson, this fantastic postdoc, which I can't see if he's online, but he's now at the University of Washington. Really talented guy. He did a paper where he was looking at the social attributes of these projects. And here he was looking at specifically mentors that get assigned to the incubating projects and mentor them through the incubation process. And the long story short of this one, Curtis has found that the person that mentors a project or how many mentors they have will lead those projects to graduation. So, so that's a social attributes kind of side of this project. This one is a little bit more standard with, building off of the, internal structure of an action situation, the Ostrom slide on the right. Anamika Sen and colleagues on the project, we were looking at the operational rules that the Apache Foundation puts on the incubating projects. And we were looking at the costs and benefits for any particular operational rule. Who gets the benefit, who gets the cost? The open source software team, the project, or the ASF person helping them, like the mentors? And the distributions the cost benefit distributions between those two actors there's a variety of different distributions we could find. And what Curtis found in this particular case, or I'm sorry, Anamika, Curtis is also a lead author of this, is that the operational rules were symmetric between the ASF actors and the development team actors. Which is in a way what maybe we expected to happen, but side note, we've studied another foundation, we found a different distribution. So this is still a puzzle. And then the last one, the last paper I report in, pretty much on time, is this one by Likang Yin and colleagues. Yin's another just unbelievable, he just got his PhD and he's now working for Google. He's very talented. But what we were looking at here was all three: social, technical, governance, and we were opening up the action situation incubation. This is a super noisy slide. The point of this slide is using definitions of what an institutional statement is, what a rule is. We were able to train a machine learning classifier to both identify emails between developers that are talking about rules, and then to classify those discussions in certain topical areas, which is what the bottom slide is. And so methodologically, this shows, and I'm going to come back to this because this is really huge, I think, is that we're now using these new technologies like machine learning AI to start pulling out institutional designs. And it's a hard problem, but it's an exciting one. This is proof that we're moving in that direction. The second part of this paper is the same time series that that earlier paper had, is that we're seeing clear footprints, longitudinal footprints of the projects along the institutional discussions, which is the top three graphics. And the bottom ones are the social network and the technical network. And again, the colors have switched. Graduated is blue, red is retired projects, but we're seeing a footprint again that these are very different. Yeah. And so you can start to use these by predicting whether they're going to graduate or retire is one of the main things that our team's been able to do. So, okay, I'm going to close with part 4 in it takes me about 4 more minutes, I think. But these are the main points from what I just talked about. We've learned the mentors matter. We've learned that rules are symmetric. We've learned that we can track these longitudinal footprints. Okay, so this is what I would love, any reactions to these 4 points that I want to just close with. One is we've had as a team, as a Convergence team, really interesting kind of dialogue sometimes in our team meetings that we call data first or theory first. And this brings me back to SciPec 25 years ago, because I wish Eduardo was here because he would remember this. In SciPec, as a graduate student in public policy, I was hearing, you got to have a theory. And then maybe take that and do hypothesis testing of that theory, right? Got to have a theory, start with that. And yet I was working with Glenn Green, who was a remote sensing colleague, and he was doing land cover change analysis using satellite images. And he didn't have a priori expectations. He was looking at those changes and going, that's interesting what's happening there. I wonder what's driving that. And I can remember as a graduate student, I was puzzled about, okay, how do I square these two approaches to epistemological approaches? Fast forward to now, Brenda's laughing because she's been in these conversations. We're having this question again, you know, theory, you gotta have a theory, and now we've got machine learning that's producing these black box variables that have a lot of prediction ability. So how do we square that as one of our puzzles? The second one, hopefully you've taken from this is that I think that unpacking in the action or reaction situation, we've always done this. In IFRI, this is a picture I pulled off the web of an IFRI researcher who I don't know, but I don't recognize. But I know we did this, I did this in Nepal. We would talk to foresters, villagers, asking them about action situations, not using that term, but trying to understand what they were doing. So, you know, we've understood, uncovered the hood of action situations for a long time. But what's different now is we have this open access to digital data, and we have these amazing tools like natural language processing and machine learning that is now creating a whole new opportunity for humanity. And that brings me to this point. Never before in human history have we ever been able to study institutional change the way we can now. Just gonna stop for that for a second. Never before. And I think it's an emerging field. This book to me is one of the most important books of my career. I use it all the time. I still use it all the time. My colleagues, if they're online, I don't know. I'm surprising them with this slide. I want this one to come up in let's say 2030. Computational institutional science, and a shout out to Curtis if he's here, because I think he was the first person I heard that made that phrase or something like it. A shout out to Seth Fry, who in a lot of ways is positioned, highly positioned to lead this charge. Maha Sweta, his PhD student, is just brilliant and doing unbelievable things. Maha, if you're here, it's crazy. Brenda's been advising Santiago. Vladimir Filkov, the PI of this project, has advised Yen. And then we've got folks, other workshoppers like Saba Siddiqui, Christopher Pranz, who's working with on the institutional grammar. We're set up, I think this community is set up to do something really important for humanity. I'll close with this point. When I was at SciPec and we were doing land cover change analysis, I remember thinking, I wish I had a remote sensor for institutions. I wish we had technology to uncover the institutional landscapes that we were studying. That's a strange metaphor maybe, but that's what I think we're moving toward here. A remote sensor for the institutional designs. And I think it's probably a 20-year out, if not more. It's a long-term project. And I'll close with this. I'm a minute or two over, but just to go back to the big reason why I'm doing this is I'm trying to figure out how do we apply open source collaboration, common space peer production to really move us forward in addressing climate change. And I use this phrase, we need to scale wide and fast. You know, we often think we gotta do both. We often think we have to do this through, you know, agreements between countries and all this stuff. We have to keep trying that. But we can also share innovations and scale them as wide as possible, like a puzzle of the globe. And I'm already seeing this, and I said to Bernie the other day that, you know, some of my talk is related to kind of what he gave last week, which was this association that's, you know, an overarching organization that's talking to different point locations that are like open source projects. I don't know anything about this one. I'm curious about it. The Northwest Community Forest, it's the same kind of thing where there's an organization and there are these point locations. And I think what they're trying to do there is help these point locations deal with the wildfires. Agrarian Commons is another group I'm talking to that's trying to kind of do a similar nonprofit foundation and network of projects. And I'll close with this one. I'm right now working on a big EPA grant with these groups. Where one of the things we're trying to do is create what we call centers for community production, which are advanced fabrication labs in a network around the United States, with the idea to have self-provisioning of things. So we're moving towards circular economies that get away from the supply chain problems, for example. And it's tied to community land trusts and it's tied to worker cooperatives. So these are the things I'm trying to do. And I'll close with Vincent's quote. And I think I said this when I first came here. Experience without theory is fantasy. Theory without experience is blind. So throughout my career, thanks to Vincent and Lynn and everyone here at this workshop, I've been trying to do things on the ground that inform the theory and kind of back and forth. So thank you for this. And for the students that are in here, this place is, I cannot believe how important this place is to me 30 years after I left. I wouldn't have done any of this had it not been for the Ostrom workshop. So thank you for your time, your listening, and I still have 20 minutes. Well,
Good for us. Okay, the floor is open, and per usual, if there is any students who would like to kick us off, please feel free. And if not, we will jump online and in the room here. The intrepid or otherwise.
Anybody who wants to dive into
Yeah.
computational institutional science with us?
Right? Yeah. Well, yeah, Simon, do you have one or are you good?
I guess it's more like yeah, I do have.
Okay, please, yeah.
It's about your sort of what you think about when it comes to artificial intelligence right now, the difference between open source and open AI and how that's kind of driving the new wave AI. Is that part of what you're interested in? And how do you see this as fit into your prior work on common peer common-based peer building?
Yeah, well, it's a really great question, and I've been tracking AI to some degree. The point that you just made about there's a difference between open source and open AI. Can you explain that a little bit more? Because I'm not sure what the latter is describing. Do you know?
So I'm also trying to understand, but I think that the basic difference is mostly about the licensing agreement.
Okay.
And also whether the AI is pre-trained and what is released and what is not released.
Right.
Yeah, and so what is shared and what is not shared is
Yeah.
sort of what is driving the difference.
Well, it's a really interesting area, and I don't know if I'm gonna answer your question successfully. There's been a lot of debate, for instance, over security, over open source and proprietary. And I remember studying this really early on, and I haven't tracked it, and I think it's really case specific. Like some, the idea originally was open source software, reading the code, more eyes could see the errors. And it probably is the case in that security one I just talked about, that somebody was able to see. I think that's exactly what happened. But there's been arguments that no, closed source will keep people from being able to figure out how to get in. So with AI, I think maybe those same arguments are there. There's interesting questions about, I think what you're getting at with open AI that's not open source is getting at more in maybe Angie's wheelhouse. That's around, the licensing of the data that's training. So you have maybe this hybrid kind of situation. So I think it's a really interesting question, and it's really an interesting challenge in terms of where we're going with this stuff. So yeah, that was probably not a fair answer. Do you want to follow up with anything? Maybe just
No, I think, yeah, I'm just trying to square all of these together, but it's, these both things.
Several lawsuits right now involving OpenAI.
I have maybe similar follow-up question. First, thanks for this talk. This was really interesting. And it's like, I want to hear your thoughts about how the framework you are, your team is developing, thinks about You talk about like two big projects in like open source, like you have like these wild projects that are standalone and like operate independently, and the ones that are operating through like the big umbrella of a non-profit organization.
Yeah.
And I was thinking if like there is room for analyzing like a third branch, there would be like the like projects that might start like one of those, but then converged into like a closed source, like become like profitable, or like the developers
Yeah.
chose to profit that into
Yeah.
the market,
Mhm.
and like maybe like transitions between these two. And that the thing that is related like to the last the previous question is that I think part like a current critique that has been raised to like for instance OpenAI, like the non-profit that runs ChatGPT, is like when they started charging. And it's like whether that was a deviation of the non-profit spirit.
Yeah,
And like I was thinking like how can I like use this
Yeah. Well, a couple reactions to that question. One is, when I was first starting to study this, I was hearing the term free Libra software versus open source software, and I was like, okay, what's the difference between that? And free Libra is really, licenses that, if you know Richard Stallman, the guy who, and his colleagues who invented the first open source free Libra license, it's called the general public license. They thought software should be a public good. And so they wrote a license that said you can't use this for proprietary purposes or commercial purposes. And then open source came along because there were some folks that were like, well, wait a second, we want to embrace business and making money. And so there's a whole set of licenses. So point A on that is that you have these different licenses that have. The other reaction to that this is a really interesting open hardware example I've heard recently that touches on kind of your thing. So this may seem like I'm going west, but I think I'm on track. This guy named Pascal Carpenter did a dissertation on this, forgetting the project name. Echo Open. So it was basically an open hardware electrocardiogram piece of equipment. And what out in he's in an organization in Europe, and they were trying to actually get this technology out into the fields where people can't afford these cardiogram equipment. So they got some engineers together, they got programmers together, they got doctors together and others, and they built an open source, they designed an open source device. Now the question was, it was coming out of the EU. So now the question was, it's got to meet the EU's laws, the regulations around medical equipment. And they didn't have any way to pay lawyers to take it through that regulation, the regulatory process. So at this point, this is what they did, which is so fascinating. They took the open source project and then they closed sourced it. And they licensed a closed source version, they got venture capital, and then through that, they were able to hire the legal people they needed to get it through the regulatory process. That then, and I still haven't been able to get an answer from them on how much cost reduction there was. Then they sold that what was originally open source to, that's now proprietary, to these rural healthcare centers. And I'm being told that it's cheaper, but how much cheaper, it's not clear to me. Then what's happened now is it's circled back, and now they're open sourcing a version 2. So it's this really interesting kind of hybrid that's trying to get through some of the cost problems because of the regulatory environment. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I think we're seeing hybrid approaches to this.
No, thank you, yeah.
And so next we have, I think if it's okay, Gustavo, and then Dahlia online, and then we'll go to you, Elka. Yeah.
Well, this is
One mic. Did you have?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, okay, oh, go ahead.
So this is a super important topic. So 3 very brief comments. So the first one, I think you will love to read Against Intellectual Monopoly by David Levine and Michele Moldrin. So this is exactly about this. It's a book with a lot of examples, including historical ones, that starts with the steam engine.
Oh my gosh, I gotta see that book. Can I get that citation? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so I'll send you the reference.
Awesome, thank you.
It's, of course, it's free online.
Okay. Good on them, good on them.
They are consistent. Second comment is the main theoretical argument against patents and intellectual monopoly in that book is the following. The traditional explanation to support patents is that without patents, there are no profits to innovation, so nobody innovates. The two counter arguments that they discuss in that book is the first one. Perfect competition is completely compatible with profits. They're called Marshallian rents. Essentially, if you're the first one to innovate, still, if everybody can copy at no cost, you have some initial rents, and those are potentially enough to pay for the opportunity cost of the entrepreneurs, and that's all you need. Everything above that is just pure monopoly rent. And the second and most important thing, and I think is highly connected to what you are doing, is the dynamic link. And the dynamic link is that the reason intellectual monopoly is really bad is that innovations are inputs for new innovations. So as a consequence, intellectual property rights are taxing innovations because you need to use one innovation to produce the next one, okay? So I think that for both reasons, for historical examples and for the deep micro arguments, this book will be.
Oh, I love
awesome.
that. Thank you for that.
And the third one is like, so going back to your last point, it's like connected to global warming, environmental issues. On this approach, the perspective is clear. You need to dismantle patents related to environmental issues. But essentially, I think what's going on is we're moving exactly in the opposite direction. Every country is fighting the industrial policy war to be the first one to dominate one environmental technology. So when I think if we buy this, it might be wrong, this approach, okay? But if we buy this approach, essentially the simple way to go is, you just essentially dismantle intellectual property rights or patents, or you shorten the patterns, let's say from whatever, 50 years, you go to 5 or 10 years. So that a technology that solves a global externality spread faster.
Thank you for those points. I really want to see that book you're talking about. Really appreciate it.
I put the
One, I had a reaction, I lost it. The second reaction was, well, no, you may be right. What I'm proposing may not be the solution. But clearly what we've been doing up to now is not solving the problem. So I think we need to try it. And the thought occurred to me, this is not my area, but I wonder about a comparative study of patents across different countries and innovation. That might be a way to kind of get at my hypothesis. I don't know how to do that. And then my third reaction was we have some lawyers here that can maybe help us with the patent problem you were in.
Oh, yeah.
part of the problem. I just not the ones at the Ostrom workshop. The other ones.
Exceptions to every rule, right? Yeah. I know we have a lot of
Lawyers.
really good reform. We got a lot of good stuff to get to still. Dahlia, if you wanted to, I could just read maybe just in the interest of time, but she was saying that, do you think GitHub or any other platform that hosts OSS projects should implement specific facilitators to help communities manage the project? And Dahlia, if you wanted to expand on that at all, I just saw you come on, feel free.
I think, yeah, that's basically it. I was just wondering, if you have any ideas.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. And I don't know if any of my other colleagues, I don't see Curtis as a go-to person on this kind of thing. I haven't studied GitHub in detail enough to know whether maybe what part of your point is, could GitHub, these projects are operating in the wild, maybe get some support by GitHub, the organization. Brenda, do you want to say something, or you look like?
Well, part of what we're doing in this project is looking at the different 501c status, because there's different ones, and how their boards are governed to get the institutional structures. But then we have a list of what is it, 122 foundations, and many of them have incubator programs, but they're done so differently. So in terms of GitHub rules, I'm not sure that GitHub
Well,
I
so,
would be interested in that, but there, we've got a lot to study with different governance arrangements for incubation programs, with different types of board governances, because they're formed as different types of nonprofits with different
Yeah.
roles.
and you know, I was talking about, I'm gonna come back to your question, Hal. You know, when we were talking about the data first, theory first, I mean, Brenda's been one of the people that's been really bringing in the theory first side. And she's got this really cool concept of volunteer energy that she's been working on with other colleagues. And so, you know, in terms of like a GitHub platform, having people working to kind of, you didn't use this term, but I think you meant it, the mentoring of these projects in the wild. I think an important part of it would be, how do you staff those up? And it might be connected to Brenda's concept of volunteer energy. So that's a really interesting idea for projects in the wild. But I don't know whether GitHub has that kind of functionality. Really interesting thought.
Or if it had that functionality, would it turn people who post their stuff to GitHub? You know, would they want that? You know, or would it add a layer of bureaucracy that would not be appreciated for the people who post to GitHub?
Yeah.
But there is a question about bringing projects from out in the wild into incubation programs, and that will lead to more success.
And one of the ones on that point that I'm seeing now, so one of the things that's come out of this project is we've got colleagues in Europe. And Europe, the EU are now creating what are called open source OSPOs, open source program offices, or they're municipal associations that are trying to form, driven by sustainability and security. So it's collective action actually in the public sector that's happening that we're starting to study.
So, Elka and Mike, I think, to finish us off, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for the really interesting
Thank you.
presentation. And I have a question regarding your framework. So you adapted the IID framework and integrated micro outcomes. So I was wondering why you didn't choose, for example, the network of action situation approach, because then you would have the different action situation with individual outcomes, and you can also integrate how they interact or impact one action situation.
Yeah, so it's a network.
I'm sure you thought about that.
Well, no, I mean, thanks for raising it, because maybe it's putting me towards some literature that I need to relook at. I know I looked at, for a while, we were having, and I gotta give a shout out to Mike, because he's, man, what a colleague. Early on when I was working on this, you know, I was asking him questions about, have you seen a paper that I could do that would allow me to summarize? And another conversation we were having was about the adjacent action situations. So my question is that the same concept, or?
Yes, it is. And then you have in each action situation, you can frame it like, okay, these are the actors, these are the interaction, and then you have an outcome of each individual action situation. And that is a little bit what you have made. You put a micro outcome, and then
So
we have this macro outcome from all
these adjacent. So
action situations.
thank you for raising it, because I did think about this and I was puzzling about it, and maybe I didn't puzzle about it enough, because I thought maybe I would get traction here. But my understanding of adjacent action situations is really more, and I could be totally wrong on this, but this is how I understand it, is that you've got an action situation that has an outcome that feeds into another action situation or sets up that next action situation. And in these programmers who are kind of updating files and stuff like that, that did not feel to me like that was that situation. It's that, the analogy I had was, it's kind of more like we've got a microscope now with big data and all these tools that we can really look at, like how those atoms are working. And so it didn't square with me to the adjacent action situation, but maybe, you know, we've got the knowledge bases here. So maybe if I'm off, I want to relook at it.
Yeah, perhaps we can discuss.
Maybe we can talk more about it. I will love to
Yeah.
talk more about that.
I think so.
I'll make this quick because that was a perfect beat in. What you're doing fits better, I think, than the network of action situation. So let me sort of give sort of explanation here. You seem a little reluctant about a little tentative about whether this is something that sort of fits in with the.
I was like, why haven't, the IID's been around forever. Why hasn't somebody come up with it?
I want to give you some reason to defend that, okay? In Lynn's understanding institutional diversity, which you highlighted in there, the phrase that really leaps out to me, she used it 2 or 3 times in the book, is that institutional analysts need to zoom in and out on action situations. Okay, and the way that book was written and the way she framed it, it's usually, and the way I came up with my network of action situations was you zoom in and out in terms of the 3 levels of analysis, the constitutional, collective, and operational. You sort of zoom into that, or you're looking at a federal, state, and local, so you're sort of zooming in. But you can also zoom out and in terms of time duration. And that's not something she spent a lot of time on. You know, a repeated instance repeated instance of similar kinds of situations. And the time series data that you like, I have time series, that can be seen as adjacent in time. Okay, and we've never really made clear, how do we define what the time frame is for a action situation? If you're doing budgetary process, it's the year, whatever the budget cycle is. You know, if you're doing elections, it's the elections, whatever. Well, there are different timescales, and you're looking at the time scale of making these minor sort of changes. And then the more macro scales, it's like going from one part of a policy cycle to the next policy cycle, okay? And so you're just zooming in and out in a different way that Lynn didn't really focus on. Because you know, all this big data stuff that you can just generate, that it wasn't there then.
That's the big point about.
It wasn't there then. So she didn't think that term, and she was thinking more in terms of the traditional hierarchies and the hierarchies that the ID had in it. But you know, you can make these action situations as long or as short as you need. And in fact, that's really a understudied aspect of how well this applies in situations, is the time span that it takes to react to changing situations. It's not something that's built into that. That ought to be somehow. And that's sort of an open question, how you build more of those dynamics into that. And what you're doing is going in that direction. So keep it up.
Thanks for that. Thank you. I know we're over time. This organization is so important. And it's just an honor to be here.
I just wanted to, just to follow on with Mike's, the thing that's so wonderful about studying the software foundation is everything's public. So right now, we're doing a policy change study, Curtis and Santiago and I, policy change study where we've got the documents and the changes in the incubation program, and we've got all of the emails. And it's crazy the amount of data that we have, but it's like an experiment almost, because you've got all the communication over time for each project. You can lay out the entire governance structure, and you know, we've done interviews, we have policy documents, we have so much, and
All can be
so much
digital.
data.
Yeah.
But it's because they're behaving in a different kind of governance system than traditional governments have governed. So it is this beyond state and market. It's really, that openness enables us to really get into the guts of how these things take place. That's great.
Well, thank you.
Well, thank you again, Charlie. And congratulations.
What an honor, what an honor.
Yeah.
Say there was food?
I think there is food today, Mike.
Food.
We got some.